In the 1960s, the car industry was a high-stakes battlefield. Every brand wanted the next big hit, but not every flashy design or roaring engine could win over buyers. Some of the most beautiful cars of the decade ended up as embarrassing sales disasters. So why did these stunners stall out so badly? Was it bad timing, poor marketing, or something else entirely? Stick around, because we're diving into a garage full of gorgeous machines that looked like winners but lost big in the real world. 1969 Shelby GT500. On paper, the 1969 Shelby GT500 should have been a dream car. Big V8? Check. Legendary name? Check. But by this point, the magic between Carroll Shelby and Ford was fading fast. The design got heavier and bulkier thanks to new safety rules and a stretched body, even with fiberglass panels to save weight. It still felt less like a racer and more like a heavyweight champ past his prime. The 428 Cobra Jet V8 delivered 335 horsepower, but it had to push a car that wasn't exactly light on its feet. The price didn't help either. It cost up to 25% more than a Mustang Mach 1, but didn't offer much extra beyond the badge. Ford took over most of the design and marketing, while Shelby stepped away mid-year, leaving the car without its original flair. Sales were so bad that nearly 800 unsold cars were simply retagged as 1970 models. It was the swan song of the original Shelby era, a final chapter that should have roared but instead limped quietly into history. 1960 Edsel Ranger. By 1960, the Edsel brand was already a punchline. Launched in 1958 with massive hype and a massive budget, it quickly became a symbol of corporate overreach. The Ranger was a last-ditch effort to salvage something from the wreck. The horse-collar grille was gone, replaced by a toned-down look. But the damage was already done. Buyers didn't want toned down. They wanted something they could trust. And Edsel wasn't it. Under the hood, the Ranger still packed a solid 352 V8 with respectable performance, but the flashy engineering ideas from earlier models were stripped away to save costs. It was basically a repackaged Ford, minus the credibility. Sales were pitiful, under 3,000 units, and Ford pulled the plug on the entire Edsel brand before 1960 was even over. The Ranger didn't just fail, it became the final nail in the coffin for one of Detroit's most expensive miscalculations. It's now remembered less for what it was, and more for the lesson it taught. Even the biggest companies can blow it spectacularly. 1969 AMC Hurst SC Rambler. If subtlety were a crime, the SC Rambler would have been the most innocent car ever built. This compact muscle machine was loud in every way. Bright red, white, and blue paint, huge hood scoop, and 315 horsepower from a 390 V8. Built with Hurst shifter know-how, it was quick enough to run the quarter mile in under 14 seconds. On the drag strip, it was a bargain-priced threat. On the street, well, not everyone wanted to drive something that looked like a rolling American flag. AMC targeted young racers, so the interior was stripped bare. No radio, no air conditioning, not even much sound insulation. That kept the price low, but it also meant comfort was non-existent. Only 1,512 were built, which might sound small, but AMC sold every single one. The problem, compared to the 85,000 Roadrunners Plymouth sold the same year, it was a drop in the ocean. The SC Rambler became a cult hero, but vanished from showrooms after 1 year. It proved you can be quick, cheap, and flashy, but without mass appeal, you're still doomed. 1962 Ford Thunderbird Sports Roadster. The Thunderbird had started as a sleek two-seater, but by the early 60s, it was a big luxury cruiser. The Sports Roadster package tried to bring back some of that original sportiness. It added wire wheels, a tonneau cover to make the back seat disappear, and a 390 V8 with 300 horsepower. It looked glamorous, no doubt about it. The problem was, it wasn't practical. The tonneau cover made the back seat useless, the wire wheels were a pain to maintain, and the price was steep compared to other performance options. Buyers couldn't figure out if it was supposed to be a sports car or a luxury car, and in truth, it wasn't really great at being either. Only 1,427 sold in 1962, and the number sank even further the next year. By 1963, Ford quietly killed the package. image. The sports roadster is now a rare collectible, but in its day, it was an identity crisis on wheels. 1966 Dodge Charger. When the first Dodge Charger hit showrooms in 1966, it looked like a rocket ship on wheels. Fastback roofline, hideaway headlights, full-width grille. It had presence. Inside, the 4-bucket seat layout with a full-length console felt futuristic. Under the hood, you could get anything from a modest 318 to the legendary 426 Hemi with 425 horsepower. On paper, it should have been a home run. In reality, it was stuck between worlds. It wasn't as practical as a sedan, wasn't as nimble as a smaller muscle car, and its size and weight made non-Hemi versions feel sluggish. Sales were under expectations, with just over 37,000 sold in its first year. It took the redesigned 1968 model to finally make the Charger a true hit. That leaves the 1966 version as a what could have been, a great-looking machine that just didn't have the right mix of speed, comfort, and style to win over the crowd. 1966 Oldsmobile Toronado. When Oldsmobile rolled out the Toronado in 1966, it was a game-changer. Front-wheel drive in a massive American coupe? Nobody had done that in decades. It packed a 425 Super Rocket V8 with 385 horsepower and styling that looked like it came straight from the future. Hidden headlights, muscular lines, and a fastback roof. It even won Motor Trend's Car of the Year. But the novelty came with baggage. Buyers were suspicious of front-wheel drive in such a heavy car, and while it handled better than most barges of the era, torque steer and heavy steering under acceleration were real issues. The complex drivetrain added cost and weight, and that made it pricier than rivals like the Thunderbird or Buick Riviera. Sales started at about 40,000 in its debut year. Decent, but nowhere near game-changing. The Toronado was ahead of its time, but in the mid-60s, ahead of its time wasn't always a compliment. People wanted proven formulas, not untested tech in a giant coupe. It's remembered today as a groundbreaking engineering feat, but in the marketplace, it was more of a cautious curiosity than a smash hit. 1964 Studebaker Daytona R2. Studebaker was on the ropes in the mid-60s, and the Daytona R2 was one of its last desperate swings. This was no ordinary sedan. It came with a factory supercharged 289 V8, cranking out 290 horsepower. For a mid-size car in 1964, that was serious muscle, enough to hit 60 in just over 7 seconds. From the outside, it didn't look like a drag strip hero. Clean lines, bucket seats, and a modest stance, but under the hood, it could run with the big names. Sadly, performance alone couldn't save Studebaker. Dealers were closing, buyers were fleeing, and the company's image was sinking fast. The R2 was expensive to make and sold in tiny numbers, about 700 with the supercharger option. Studebaker shut down U.S. car production in 1965, making the R2 not just a rare muscle sleeper, but one of the last gasps of a dying brand. It's a gem for collectors now, but in its own time, it was like shouting into the wind, fast, rare, and doomed. 1961 Oldsmobile Starfire. Oldsmobile launched the Starfire in 1961 to compete with the Thunderbird and Riviera. This wasn't a car for budget shoppers. It came loaded with power steering, power brakes, automatic transmission, and even power bucket seats as standard. The 394 Rocket V8 pumped out 335 horsepower, and the interior was dressed to impress with brushed aluminum and sporty console trim. The problem? It was too close to Cadillac territory in price, but didn't carry Cadillac prestige. It was heavy, and despite big horsepower, it wasn't particularly nimble. Buyers saw more style than substance, and when the Thunderbird undercut it with better marketing and sleeker looks, the Starfire never stood a chance. In its first year, it sold around 35,000 units, not awful, but not enough to establish it as a serious contender. Sales kept slipping, and by 1966, it quietly left the lineup. It was a rolling showcase of what Oldsmobile could build, but not what buyers wanted to park in their driveway. 1963 Chrysler 300J. Chrysler's letter series cars had been icons of speed and luxury, but by 1963, the magic was fading. The 300J looked aggressive with its sculpted sides and toilet seat deck lid, and it packed a 413 Golden Lion V8 with 390 horsepower. Inside, it was all high-end drama, bucket seats front and back, electroluminescent gauges, and a full-length console. But it had an identity crisis. Too brash for luxury buyers, too big for performance purists. Younger drivers were buying smaller, lighter muscle cars, and older customers wanted quiet refinement. At a time when tastes were shifting, the 300J's size and price worked against it. Chrysler built only 400 units, the lowest number in the entire letter series history. The 300J had all the ingredients for greatness, power, style, exclusivity, but it was playing to an audience that no longer existed. Today, it's a rare find, but in its era, it was the definition of a gorgeous misfire. Chevrolet Impala. The Impala SS427 was a last hurrah for the big block, full-size performance coupe. The 427 V8 offered up to 390 horsepower, and this nearly 2-ton machine could still hit 60 in about 7 seconds. On the highway, it was a monster, smooth, powerful, and ready to devour miles. But by 1969, buyers were flocking to smaller, cheaper muscle cars, like the Chevelle SS or Camaro. The SS427's subtle looks didn't scream performance, and for the price, many saw better value elsewhere. It was heavy, and while it had straight-line speed, it couldn't match the agility of midsize or pony cars. Chevy sold fewer than 2,000 in 1969, and it was the last year a full-size Impala carried the Super Sport badge. The SS427 had the muscle, but not the market. Its audience had already moved on, leaving it as one of the decade's most powerful but overlooked failures. Chevrolet Corvette L88. The 1969 Corvette L88 wasn't built for cruising down Main Street, it was built to win races. Under its sleek C3 body, the L88 carried a monstrous 427 big block officially rated at 430 horsepower, but real-world output was well over 500. This was raw, uncompromising performance, race-ready suspension, heavy-duty brakes, and almost zero creature comforts. In fact, Chevy deliberately stripped it down. No radio, no heater, no air conditioning, anything that added weight or distracted from speed was gone. The exhaust was deafening, and the engine demanded constant tuning. It cost almost twice as much as a standard Corvette, and unless you were a serious racer, it made little sense as a daily driver. Only 116 L88s were built in 1969 out of nearly 39,000 Corvettes. The rest of the world wasn't ready for a street car that behaved like a race car. Today, they're holy grail collectibles, but in their time, they were showroom poison, too hardcore for almost everyone, except the most dedicated gearheads. Chevrolet Camaro Z28. The first-year Z28 was designed for one thing, winning in the SCCA Trans Am Racing Series. Its high-revving 302 V8 officially made 290 horsepower, but insiders knew the real number was higher. With a close ratio 4-speed, heavy-duty suspension, and disc brakes, it was a track weapon in disguise. The problem? Chevy kept it so low-key that most people didn't even know it existed. It wasn't in the sales brochure, and dealers didn't push it. Without flashy stripes or big marketing campaigns, the Z28 blended in next to SS and RS models that were easier to sell. Only 602 were sold in 1967, making it ultra rare today, but a sales flop back then. It was a car that could outrun and outhandle most muscle cars of its time, yet it slipped under the radar. A legend in hindsight, but in its debut year, it was a ghost in the showroom. 1968 Buick GS 400 Stage 1. Buick wanted in on the muscle car craze, but with a twist. Refined power. The GS 400 Stage 1 upgrade added a hotter cam, bigger carb, freer exhaust, and better ignition timing, bringing the big 400 V8 to 345 horsepower. The heavy-duty suspension kept the ride smooth but added handling chops. The styling, though, was pure Buick, clean, understated, and almost too polite. That was the problem. In an era where buyers wanted stripes, scoops, and aggressive lines, the GS 400 Stage 1 just didn't look the part. Buick also didn't shout about it in ads, so few knew what it could really do. Only about 1,500 were sold in 1968. For those who bought one, it was a sleeper hit. Luxury inside, muscle under the hood, but for the broader market, it was invisible. It's proof that in the 60s, you couldn't just be fast, you had to look fast too. 1969 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am. The very first Trans Am should have been a smash hit. Pontiac gave it a high-compression 400 V8, upgraded suspension, quick ratio steering, and functional hood scoops. Painted only in white with blue stripes, it looked ready for the track, and it was. Built to race in the Trans Am series. The timing, though, was terrible. It launched late in the model year, dealers didn't promote it, and it ended up competing with Pontiac's own GTO for attention. Most buyers didn't know why it cost more, and the white and blue only paint scheme wasn't for everyone. Just 697 were built, including only 8 convertibles. It laid the foundation for the Trans Am legend, but in 1969, it was barely a blip. A classic case of a car with all the right moves, but none of the marketing muscle to back it up. 1965 Pontiac 2+2. Nicknamed the GTO's big brother, the Pontiac 2+2 was a full-size Catalina coupe with a standard 421 V8 and optional high-output version making 376 horsepower. It had dual exhausts, heavy-duty suspension, and a sporty interior. Serious performance wrapped in a big, stylish package. But that size was part of the problem. Muscle car fans preferred smaller, lighter cars like the GTO, while traditional full-size buyers leaned toward luxury over speed. The 2+2 sat in the middle, appealing strongly to, well, not many people. Pontiac also put all its marketing power behind the GTO, leaving the 2+2 in the shadows. Even with praise from magazines for its speed, only a few thousand were sold in 1965. It's now an overlooked gem for collectors, but at the time, it was a rare sight. Proof that even great performance can't save a car without a clear audience. 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. The Boss 429 wasn't just another Mustang. It was a street-legal NASCAR homologation special. Ford shoehorned a massive 429 Hemi-head V8 under the hood, conservatively rated at 375 horsepower, but capable of well over 500 with the right tweaks. To fit it, Ford had to outsource assembly to Carcraft, which heavily modified the engine bay, moved the battery to the trunk, and reinforced the chassis. It looked mean, sounded even meaner, and was one of the most exclusive Mustangs ever built. But here's the twist. It wasn't that great on the street. The big engine was choked by a conservative cam and carb setup to keep warranty claims down, and the front-heavy weight hurt handling. Priced at over $4,000, it was far more expensive than a Mach 1 with similar real-world performance. Ford sold just 859 in 1969. Today, it's one of the most sought-after Mustangs ever made. But in its time, it was an expensive, overbuilt curiosity, legendary on paper, lukewarm in sales. 1969 Mercury Marauder X100. Mercury tried to split the difference between full-size luxury and muscle car aggression with the Marauder X100. It had a sleek fastback roof, hidden headlights, and Ford's 429 Thunderjet V8, making 360 horsepower. On paper, it should have appealed to buyers who wanted speed with a touch of class. The problem was identity. Was it a gentleman's hot rod or a luxury coupe? Mercury's marketing couldn't decide, and neither could buyers. It was too big and plush for muscle purists, and too brash for traditional luxury fans. Even the price, competitive for what it offered, wasn't enough to convince people to take a risk. In 1969, fewer than 6,000 were sold. It was a bold experiment that fell between markets and disappeared quickly. Now, it's a rare oddball from the muscle luxury era. Cool to look at, but commercially, a complete miss. 1969 Mercury Cougar Eliminator. The Eliminator was Mercury's attempt to turn the Cougar into a true muscle car rival to the GTO and Camaro. It got a blackout grille, front air dam, rear spoiler, racing stripes, and high-impact colors. Buyers could choose engines up to the 428 Cobra Jet with 410 horsepower. It was fast, good-looking, and loaded with performance potential. But Mercury's image was more refined cruiser than street brawler, and younger muscle car fans weren't rushing to Mercury showrooms. Dealership enthusiasm was weak, and most buyers simply opted for a Mustang, which offered similar performance for less money. Only 2002 Eliminators were sold in 1969. It's a head-turner now, but back then, it couldn't shake the Cougar's luxury reputation enough to become a true sales hit. 1969 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2. Built to give Mercury an edge in NASCAR, the Cyclone Spoiler 2 was a street-legal aero car with an extended nose and flush grille for better high-speed stability. Under the hood, it had the 428 Cobra Jet V8, making it as quick as it looked. Special editions tied to drivers like Dan Gurney and Cale Yarborough added unique paint schemes. Only 351 were built, just enough to meet NASCAR rules. For regular buyers, the styling was divisive. The long, pointed nose made parking a chore and gave the car a polarizing look. Plus, unless you cared about racing, the aero upgrades meant little in daily driving. It's now a super rare collector's piece, but in its own time, it was a niche machine for hardcore fans, a stunning engineering achievement that failed to find mass appeal. 1969 Ford Torino Talladega. Like its Mercury cousin, the Talladega was designed to dominate NASCAR. Ford reshaped the nose for aerodynamics, dropped the rocker panels for a lower stance, and slipped in the 428 Cobra Jet V8. On the track, it worked, helping Ford win the 1969 Manufacturers' Championship. On the street, though, it was an odd fit. Ford only built 754 to satisfy NASCAR rules, and they came with bench seats and column shift automatics, hardly the sporty setup muscle buyers wanted. The aerodynamic nose was great for high-speed ovals, but unnecessary for daily driving. It was a winner in competition, but a dud in showrooms. The Talladega's purpose-built nature made it a legend for racing historians and a head-scratcher for casual buyers. 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona. If subtlety was your thing, the Daytona wasn't for you. With an 18-inch aerodynamic nose cone and a massive 23-inch rear wing, it looked like a science experiment on wheels, but it wasn't built for style points. It was designed to break 200 mph on NASCAR's high-banked tracks, and it did exactly that. Buyers could choose between the 440 Magnum or the legendary 426 Hemi, both absolute monsters. On the track, it was untouchable. On the street, that huge wing blocked rear visibility, the long nose scraped on driveways, and the styling was simply too wild for most buyers. Dodge needed to sell just over 500 for NASCAR rules, and they barely hit that number. Some even sat unsold into the early 70s, with dealerships converting them back into regular Chargers just to move inventory. Today, it's a blue-chip collectible worth a fortune. But back in 1969, the Daytona was a car that scared off as many buyers as it impressed, a race-bred legend that flopped in the showroom. 1964 Plymouth Barracuda. Plymouth technically beat Ford to the pony car game by launching the Barracuda 2 weeks before the Mustang. Based on the Valiant, it featured a huge wraparound rear window that gave it a distinctive fastback look. The top engine option was a 273 V8, making up to 180 horsepower. Not bad, but not thrilling. The problem was image. To enthusiasts, it looked like a warmed-over compact instead of an all-new performance machine. Without aggressive styling or big power, it was quickly overshadowed by the Mustang's instant popularity. Sales were modest, but nowhere near Ford's blockbuster numbers. Later Barracudas would evolve into true muscle beasts, but the 1964 original was more of a stylish commuter than a street fighter. It's proof that being first to market doesn't mean much if you can't also capture the imagination. 1962 Plymouth Savoy, Belvedere, and Fury. In 1962, Plymouth downsized its full-size cars after a last-minute decision from company leadership, thinking Chevrolet was about to do the same. Chevy didn't, and Plymouth was left with cars that looked oddly small and narrow compared to the competition. Performance wasn't the issue. Buyers could get the mighty 4x13 Max Wedge V8 with over 400 horsepower. These cars dominated drag strips but looked awkward in showrooms. The shrunken proportions, strange styling lines, and stubby stance turned off traditional full-size customers. Sales tanked, and Plymouth lost thousands of buyers to Ford and GM that year. On the track, they were terrors. On the street, they were victims of bad intel and worse timing, a styling misstep wrapped around world-class performance. 1962 Dodge Dart. Like Plymouth, Dodge misjudged the market in 1962, downsizing its Dart to an in-between size that didn't please anyone. It was too big for compact buyers, too small for full-size fans, and styled with awkward proportions that earned it the nickname Plucked Chicken. Under the hood, though, it could be a monster. With the 413 Max Wedge V8, it could produce over 400 horsepower and destroy quarter miles. But straight-line speed couldn't fix its identity crisis. Sales fell sharply from the previous year, and Dodge rushed to redesign it for 1963. The 62 Dart is now a quirky collector's piece, remembered more for its odd looks and marketing blunder than its drag strip dominance. A fast car trapped in the wrong body. 1968 AMC AMX. AMC decided to do something completely different with the AMX, a two-seat American muscle car. It rode on a shortened Javelin platform, looked sharp, and came with a 390 V8 making up to 315 horsepower. It could sprint to 60 in under 7 seconds and earned respect from the press for its handling. But two seats meant limited appeal. Buyers who wanted performance usually wanted space for friends, and sports car purists weren't about to cross-shop AMC against European brands. Add in AMC's smaller dealership network and limited marketing budget, and the AMX became a niche product. About 19,000 were sold over 3 years, with the 1968 model being the high point. It's beloved by enthusiasts today, but in its time, the AMX was a daring experiment that the broader market simply didn't buy into. 1965 AMC Marlin. AMC wanted to stand out in the growing fastback trend, so they created the Marlin, a mid-size personal coupe with a sweeping roofline and huge curved rear glass. Under the hood, you could get a 327 V8 with 270 horsepower, giving it respectable, if not jaw-dropping, performance. The Marlin's problem was simple. It didn't know who it was for. Muscle car fans thought it looked too heavy and luxurious, while personal luxury buyers preferred something more upscale. AMC pitched it as sporty but comfortable, but that middle ground didn't excite anyone. Only about 10,000 sold in its first year, and sales dropped sharply afterward. By 1967, it was gone from AMC's lineup. Today, its unusual shape makes it a standout at classic shows, but in the 60s, it was a fastback that failed to hook either side of its intended market. 1961 Pontiac Tempest. The first-gen Tempest was one of Pontiac's boldest engineering experiments. Instead of the usual setup, it used a rear-mounted transaxle connected by a flexible drive shaft, which gave it great weight distribution. Power came from a slant-4 engine derived from half of a Pontiac V8. It was innovative, but it wasn't trouble-free. The drivetrain was complex and expensive to fix, and reliability issues quickly soured owners. Even though it handled better than most compact American cars of the time, it was hard to sell a car with a reputation for being finicky. Pontiac eventually ditched the unusual layout in favor of a more conventional design by 1964. The Tempest was ahead of its time in concept, but not in execution, proving that being different doesn't always mean being successful. 1962 Oldsmobile Jetfire. The Jetfire made history as the first turbocharged production car. Its aluminum 215 V8 and Rochester turbo put out 215 horsepower, a big number for a small engine in the early 60s. On paper, it was high-tech performance wrapped in a stylish compact coupe. In reality, it came with headaches. To prevent engine knock, it required a special turbo-rocket fluid mix of water and methanol, which had to be topped up regularly. Owners who ignored it or didn't understand it ended up with blown engines. Many Jetfires were eventually converted to regular carbureted setups just to keep them running. Only about 3,700 were sold before Oldsmobile pulled the plug. It was a fascinating milestone in forced induction history, but for 60s buyers, it was just too complicated. 1960 Chevrolet Corvair. Chevy's Corvair was unlike anything else on the market. Rear engine, air-cooled, with clean European-inspired styling. It was designed to compete with imports like Volkswagen and bring new buyers to Chevrolet. The early Corvairs, however, had a handling quirk thanks to their swing-axle rear suspension, which could cause sudden oversteer. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, brought national attention to the issue, and the damage to the Corvair's reputation was immediate and lasting. Even though later models improved the suspension, the bad press stuck. Production limped on until 1969, but sales never recovered. The Corvair remains one of the most controversial cars in American history, an engineering risk that backfired in the public eye. The Studebaker Avanti. The Avanti looked like nothing else on the road in 1962. Fiberglass body, sleek lines, and a supercharged 289 V8 making up to 290 horsepower. It was quick, stylish, and designed to revive Studebaker's image. Unfortunately, production delays and quality control problems meant many cars didn't reach buyers on time. Studebaker's financial troubles didn't help either, and dealers struggled to get enough stock to make an impact. Only about 4,600 were built before Studebaker ended U.S. production entirely a few years later. The Avanti is now seen as a forward-thinking classic, but in its own time, it was a victim of poor timing and a struggling company. It had the looks and the speed, but not the backing to survive. The 1960s gave us some of the most beautiful, innovative, and powerful cars ever built, and some of the most spectacular flops. Each of these machines had the style to turn heads but stumbled when it came to winning buyers. Which one do you think deserved a second chance? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and keep your engines revved. We've got plenty more stories from the glory and the heartbreak of classic car history.